You get nothing, Dad. My own daughter said those words while staring at a $255 million inheritance document. She actually laughed when she thought I was cut out completely. Her husband Gregory smirked and whispered, "Finally, someone put the old failure in his place." But then the attorney said four words that changed everything. Let me finish reading. What happened next destroyed my daughter's life forever. And honestly, she deserved every second of it. I'm James Crawford, 64 years old, and for 30 years, my family treated me like garbage. My daughter, Allison Crawford Bennett, called me a loser at every family dinner, told her friends I was an embarrassment, filed a restraining order claiming I was mentally unstable and dangerous to her children. She even stole $150,000 from my bank accounts using perfectly forged signatures while secretly planning to have me locked up in a psychiatric ward so she could steal everything I owned. Allison had no idea who she was really messing with, and I'm about to tell you exactly how I destroyed my own daughter's life using nothing but patience, perfect timing, and a secret I'd been hiding for 3 decades. This story has more twists than anything you've seen on Netflix, and the ending will make you believe in justice again. If you've ever been underestimated by people who should love you, if you've ever been treated like you don't matter by your own family, you need to hear this. Please subscribe right now because this channel is dedicated to stories where the underdog wins big and the bullies get exactly what they deserve. My daughter Allison thought she was stealing from a confused old man named James Crawford living in poverty in apartment 4B on Oak Street. She had no idea she was robbing the founder and owner of Meridian Capital Group, a billionaire who'd been pretending to be poor for 30 years. The look on her face when FBI agent Sarah Mitchell walked into that law office? Priceless. The moment she realized her failure father owned a $890 million investment company? Even better. But the absolute best part? She's currently serving 18 months in federal prison while I'm using her inheritance money to fund the Crawford Foundation for kids whose parents actually love them. Justice isn't just sweet. Sometimes it's absolutely perfect. And this is exactly how I made it happen. Allison Crawford Bennett was 33 years old, 5'6", perfectly manicured, and utterly convinced of her own superiority in every possible way. She'd married Gregory Bennett 3 years ago, a trust fund baby who'd never worked a day in his life, but somehow managed to convince everyone he was a successful entrepreneur. They lived in a $2, $3 million colonial house in Westchester County, complete with a 3-car garage, swimming pool, and the kind of professionally landscaped yard that requires a full-time gardening service to maintain. They drove matching BMW X5s belonged to the country club and made sure everyone they met understood that they'd made it in life despite the unfortunate burden of having a complete failure for a father and father-in-law. The psychological abuse had been systematic and relentless for years. Every family gathering was an exercise in public humiliation, carefully orchestrated to remind me of my place in the social order. "Dad, you're honestly embarrassing," Allison would announce at family dinners, usually right after I'd said something she deemed inappropriate or unseemly. "Can't you at least try to dress better? People are starting to ask questions about where I come from, and I'm running out of excuses." Gregory would smirk behind his wine glass, the kind of superior smile that comes from inherited wealth and unearned confidence. "Don't worry, honey. Everyone knows that successful people sometimes have unfortunate setbacks in the family tree. It's not your fault your father never learned how to apply himself properly." The gaslighting was subtle but constant, designed to make me question my own memory, my own perceptions, my own worth as a human being. "Are you sure you remember that correctly, Dad?" "That's not what happened at all. You're getting confused again. Maybe you should write these things down." They had convinced everyone, including me, that I was losing my mind, that my memory was failing due to age and stress and the accumulated weight of a lifetime of poor decisions, that maybe I really was as pathetic and worthless as they constantly implied. I'd catch myself second-guessing simple decisions, wondering if I really had forgotten to lock the apartment door or pay the electric bill on time. I started keeping obsessive notes about daily activities, terrified that my apparent mental decline was accelerating and that soon I'd be completely dependent on my daughter's dubious mercy. Maybe you should see someone professional, Allison suggested during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations. Memory issues definitely run in families, you know. Uncle Theodore had some problems toward the end, too, though obviously he was much more successful than you ever managed to be. Every conversation was carefully calculated to undermine my confidence while simultaneously positioning Allison as the responsible, long suffering daughter who was heroically dealing with an increasingly burdensome parent. She'd sigh heavily whenever anyone mentioned my name, shake her head sadly, and change the subject to more pleasant topics. The isolation was almost complete. Old friends from my teaching days had gradually stopped calling after years of Allison's subtle discouragement. Dad's not really up for visitors these days, she'd tell them. He gets confused easily, and it's honestly quite difficult for everyone involved. Family members received similar messages. Dad's having some issues lately. Nothing serious, but we think it's better if he doesn't attend large gatherings until we figure out what's going on. The financial control had been gradually increasing as well. Dad, you shouldn't strain your eyes with all that fine print, she'd say whenever I received important documents. Let me handle the paperwork. You know how these legal documents can be confusing, especially when you're dealing with memory issues. So helpful, so considerate, so perfectly positioned to monitor and control every aspect of my financial life while maintaining the facade of being a loving, responsible daughter. The psychological manipulation was masterful in its simplicity. Create doubt about the victim's mental competence. Isolate them from friends and support systems. Position yourself as their only advocate and protector. Gradually assume control of their financial affairs. And all the while, maintain the public image of a successful daughter nobly caring for an unfortunate parent. By the time I realized what was happening, Allison had spent months laying the groundwork for the perfect crime, the kind of systematic elder abuse that happens thousands of times every year, usually without anyone noticing until it's far too late to prevent permanent damage. But there was one crucial detail Allison had overlooked in her careful planning. Last Thanksgiving, 2023, marked the point of no return. Allison filed a restraining order against me, claiming I was mentally unstable and posed a credible threat to her children's safety. The paperwork was professionally prepared, thoroughly documented, and completely devastating to what remained of my reputation. Mr. Crawford, Detective Scott Morrison explained during our meeting at the county courthouse, your daughter has provided substantial evidence suggesting that you've been exhibiting increasingly erratic and potentially dangerous behavior over the past several months. The documents were a masterpiece of character assassination. Witness statements from neighbors describing my allegedly odd behavior, walking around the apartment complex at unusual hours, talking to myself, appearing confused and disoriented during normal daily activities. Medical opinions from Dr. Sarah Williams, a psychiatrist I'd never actually met, suggesting early-stage dementia with potential for aggressive episodes. Photographs of my apartment that had somehow been taken from inside, showing what appeared to be a hoarder's den with newspapers stacked everywhere and empty bottles scattered around. Phone records showing multiple calls to various businesses where I'd allegedly become belligerent and threatening when confused about billing statements or service issues. I understand this is difficult for you to process, Detective Morrison continued with practiced sympathy, but the restraining order prohibits you from coming within 500 feet of your daughter's residence, her workplace, or your grandchildren's school. I sat in that sterile government office, surrounded by the carefully constructed wreckage of my reputation, and realized something crucial. Allison wasn't just embarrassed by her failure of a father. She was actively afraid of me discovering something. But what? The answer arrived 3 weeks later in my mailbox, hidden between credit card offers and grocery store circulars. Someone had been intercepting my mail for months, but they'd missed one critical piece. Pacific Bank Statement. Account opened September 15th, 2023. $89,000 personal loan approved. Primary borrower, James Crawford. Monthly payment, $1,247. First payment due October 15th. The signature looked perfect. Even I might have believed I'd signed it if I hadn't known with absolute certainty that I'd never set foot in a Pacific Bank branch in my entire life. I studied the loan documents with growing amazement at their thoroughness. My social security number, my employment history from the school district, even my mother's maiden name, all perfectly accurate. Whoever had done this had access to detailed personal information spanning decades. That's when I understood what the restraining order was really about. Allison wasn't trying to protect her children from a crazy grandfather. She was systematically covering her tracks before I could discover the full scope of what she'd been doing. Within a week, I'd identified two additional fraudulent accounts. First, National Credit Union, $28,000 home improvement loan. Community Savings Bank, $34,000 debt consolidation loan. Total theft, $151,000 over a 6-month period. The methodology was sophisticated and clearly planned well in advance. Each application had been submitted from a different IP address. The forged signatures showed subtle variations that suggested practice and preparation. The loan purposes were all plausible for someone my age with my financial profile. Most importantly, all three applications listed Allison as my emergency contact and designated financial representative in case of medical incapacity. If something happened to me, if I became incapacitated, hospitalized, or declared mentally incompetent, she would automatically gain legal control over all my financial affairs. The restraining order supported a narrative of mental instability. The medical opinions suggested cognitive decline. The fraudulent loans provided her with immediate access to significant cash while positioning her as my responsible caretaker. It was a textbook setup for financial elder abuse, executed with the precision of someone who'd studied the legal system and understood exactly how to manipulate it. But Allison had made one critical miscalculation. It turns out this was just the beginning. Uncle Theodore passed away on March 15th at the age of 93, sharp as a surgical blade until his final breath. Theodore Crawford had been the family patriarch for as long as anyone could remember, the man who'd built Crawford Industries from a single construction crew into one of the largest industrial contractors on the East Coast. He was also the only person in the family who'd ever treated me with genuine respect. While everyone else saw a failed teacher and divorce disappointment, Theodore saw something different. Jimmy, he used to tell me during our quiet conversations at family gatherings, the sheep never suspect the wolf until it's too late. Remember that. I'd always wondered what he meant by those cryptic comments. Theodore had a reputation for speaking in riddles, dropping hints and observations that often didn't make sense until years later. He'd watch family dynamics with those sharp blue eyes, taking mental notes on everyone's behavior, calculating relationships like a chess master, planning moves several turns ahead. Patricia Hendricks from Hendricks and Associates called me on a rainy Tuesday in April. "Jim, you need to come in as soon as possible. It's about Theodore's estate, and there are some things we need to discuss." Her voice carried that careful, measured tone that experienced attorneys develop when they're about to deliver news that will fundamentally change someone's life. Not good news or bad news necessarily, just life-altering news that requires careful handling. The preliminary meeting took place in Patricia's office, a temple to old-money professionalism with leather-bound law books, a mahogany desk the size of a small car, and the kind of subdued elegance that whispers rather than shouts about serious wealth. "Your uncle's estate is quite substantial," Patricia began, spreading documents across her desk with the precision of a dealer at a high-stakes poker game. More substantial than most family members probably realized. Crawford Industries, valued at $185 million after recent acquisitions, an expansion into renewable energy infrastructure. Real estate portfolio, $45 million across 3 states, including commercial properties in Boston, residential developments in Florida, and a massive ranch in Montana that Theodore had purchased as a long-term investment. Investment accounts, $25 million in carefully diversified blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, and international pennants that had been growing steadily for decades, under Theodore's conservative but shrewd management. total estate value, $255 million. I stared at the numbers, trying to process the magnitude of what Theodore had accomplished during his 93 years. He'd been wealthy, obviously, but none of us had imagined he was worth $250 million. And the beneficiaries? I asked. Patricia consulted another document. 3 primary beneficiaries named in the will: Allison Crawford Bennett, Gregory Bennett, and James Crawford. My name was there, written in Theodore's careful handwriting. After 30 years of being treated like the family embarrassment, Uncle Theodore had included me as an equal beneficiary in his final testament. However, Patricia continued, Theodore was very specific about the conditions for distribution. Everyone named in the will must be present for the final reading. No exceptions, no proxies, no delays. She looked at me over her reading glasses. He was particularly insistent that you be there, regardless of any family disputes or legal complications. He mentioned something about wanting to see everyone's true character revealed at the appropriate moment. When is the reading scheduled? October 12th, 2:30 p.m. Theodore chose the date specifically. He said the timing would be important for reasons that would become clear later. Walking out of that office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine power. Not the desperate scrambling of a man trying to prove his worth to people who'd already written him off, but the quiet confidence that comes from holding information that other people desperately want. For the first time in 3 decades, I had leverage. Allison needed me at that will reading if she wanted access to her share of Theodore's fortune. The restraining order suddenly became a complicated legal obstacle rather than a simple tool of intimidation. Theodore had been planning this moment, I realized. The careful wording about true character, the insistence on my presence, the specific timing, everything had been calculated to create maximum dramatic impact. But there was something else, something I could feel in the careful way Patricia had presented the information. Theodore hadn't just left me money. He'd left me something much more valuable: the opportunity to discover who my family really was when they thought I was no longer a threat. The will reading was set for October 12th at 2:30 p.m., 6 months away. 6 months to prepare, to investigate, to plan my own moves in whatever game Theodore had initiated. I'd been waiting for a moment like this for 30 years, though I'd never imagined it would come in the form of my uncle's final gift. I have waited for this moment for 30 years. Timothy Walsh had been my certified public accountant for 15 years, ever since my divorce when I'd needed help sorting through the financial wreckage of a failed marriage. He was meticulous, conservative, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting his clients from financial fraud. Jim, we have a serious problem that requires immediate attention, Timothy said when I arrived at his office 3 days after the will reading announcement. Someone has been systematically using your social security number and personal information to obtain unauthorized loans. Timothy's office was the complete opposite of Patricia Hendricks's old-world elegance. Modern, efficient, with multiple computer screens displaying real-time financial data and enough technology to run a small investment firm. He'd built his practice on protecting middle-class clients from exactly the kind of sophisticated fraud that was apparently being perpetrated against me. The evidence he'd compiled was both damning and impressive in its scope. 3 separate financial institutions, 6 months of coordinated activity, and a total of $151,000 in fraudulent loans, all bearing my forged signature and stolen personal information. Let's start with Pacific Bank, Timothy said, pulling up digital copies of loan documents on his largest monitor. $89,000 personal loan approved September 15th, with your signature, social security number, and complete employment history from your teaching career. The signature was perfect, not just similar to my handwriting, but identical in ways that suggested either forgery by a professional or access to multiple authentic samples for practice and refinement. First National Credit Union followed on October 3rd, Timothy continued. $28,000 home improvement loan. Again, perfect documentation, perfect signature, even included your mother's maiden name and the address where you lived 20 years ago. And the third? Community Savings Bank, October 22nd. $34,000 debt consolidation loan. This one's particularly sophisticated because it references the previous two loans and presents a convincing narrative about consolidating existing debt. I studied the documents with growing amazement at their thoroughness. Whoever had done this understood not just how to forge signatures, but how to construct a believable financial profile that would pass institutional scrutiny. There's more, Timothy said, pulling up bank surveillance footage on another screen. Community Savings has security cameras in their lobby. Look at this. The video showed a woman who looked remarkably like Allison entering the bank on October 22nd, staying for approximately 20 minutes, then leaving with a manila envelope. The timestamp matched exactly with the loan application submission. She was careful about the other two banks, Timothy explained. No cameras captured clear images. But Community Savings upgraded their security system last month, and they got her. The methodical nature of the fraud was breathtaking. This wasn't desperation or opportunistic crime. It was a carefully planned, professionally executed operation that had been months in the making. The loan applications all show the same pattern, Timothy continued. Small amounts relative to your theoretical income, spread across multiple institutions to avoid triggering fraud alerts, submitted from different IP addresses to prevent detection algorithms from noticing the pattern. What about the money? That's where it gets interesting. All three loans were deposited into a checking account at Manhattan Trust Bank. Account holder, Allison Crawford Bennett. The money was then systematically transferred to various investment accounts, offshore holdings, and cash withdrawals just under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. She's been laundering the stolen money? Very professionally. Someone taught her exactly how to move money around without triggering federal monitoring systems. This isn't amateur night. Whoever planned this operation understands banking regulations, money laundering prevention protocols, and financial investigation procedures. Timothy pulled up another screen showing a complex web of financial transactions. There's something else that concerns me. All three loan applications list Allison as your emergency contact and designated financial representative in case of medical incapacity or cognitive impairment. The full scope of the plan was finally becoming clear. Establish a pattern of mental decline through medical documentation and witness statements. Obtain power of attorney through emergency contact designations. Systematically drain available credit while positioning herself as the responsible family member dealing with an incompetent parent. If something happened to you, Timothy explained, if you were hospitalized, declared mentally incompetent, or died unexpectedly, she would automatically gain legal control over all your financial affairs. The loans would become her responsibility, but so would any assets in your name, including my share of Theodore's estate. Exactly. A quarter of $255 million is worth approximately $85 million, more than enough to pay off $151,000 in fraudulent loans and still have enough left over to live very comfortably for the rest of her life. I sat quietly for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what my daughter had attempted. This wasn't simple theft or family financial abuse. This was a comprehensive plan to destroy my legal competency, steal my identity, and position herself to inherit money that she believed was rightfully hers anyway. We need to call the police immediately, Timothy said. Federal authorities, actually, since this crosses state lines and involves identity theft, bank fraud, and money laundering. Not yet, I replied after careful consideration. First, we set a trap. Jim, this is serious criminal activity. Every day we wait gives her more time to cover her tracks or escalate her efforts. I understand the risks, but I want to catch her in the act of confessing. I want her to explain exactly what she's been doing and why she thinks she's justified in doing it. Timothy looked skeptical. That's dangerous. If she realizes you're investigating her, she might try to have you committed immediately before you can expose what she's done. Then we'd better make sure she doesn't realize what's happening until it's too late for her to stop it. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Give Allison enough rope to hang herself with. Make her think she was safe, that her confused old father was completely unaware of what was happening. Let her get overconfident and sloppy. Meanwhile, we'd be documenting everything. She doesn't know I'm watching every penny. I called Allison 3 days later and suggested we meet for coffee to discuss some confusing financial documents I'd received in the mail. My tone was carefully calibrated to sound bewildered and slightly pathetic, exactly what she expected from her failing father. Of course, Dad, she replied, with the kind of exaggerated patience people use when talking to small children or elderly relatives. I'd be happy to help you sort through whatever's confusing you. You know how these financial companies can be with their complicated paperwork. We arranged to meet at the Starbucks on Main Street at 11:45 a.m. on a Tuesday. Public location, plenty of witnesses, excellent acoustics, and most importantly, the perfect setting for the FBI wire I'd be wearing courtesy of Agent Sarah Mitchell and the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. Agent Mitchell had briefed me extensively the night before at the FBI field office downtown. Case number 2024-089, officially classified as a multi-jurisdictional financial elder abuse investigation with potential money laundering components. We need her to clearly admit to the identity theft on tape, Agent Mitchell explained, while a technician fitted me with the recording device. One unambiguous confession that she knowingly used your personal information to commit bank fraud. The wire was smaller than a matchbox, virtually undetectable when properly positioned. If she becomes suspicious for any reason, abort the conversation immediately, the agent warned. We only get one opportunity to do this correctly. What's my cover story if she notices the wire? Heart monitor, Agent Mitchell replied without hesitation. Same general size and shape, plausible for someone your age with a history of stress-related health issues. But hopefully it won't come to that. But, Allison arrived exactly 15 minutes late, as she always did to demonstrate that her time was more valuable than mine. She looked like she'd just stepped out of a fashion magazine. Perfectly styled hair, expensive handbag, manicured nails, and the kind of understated jewelry that costs more than most people's monthly salary. She surveyed the coffee shop with practiced efficiency, checking for anyone she might recognize, then sat down with her back to the wall where she could observe the entire room. Professional level situational awareness that suggested she'd been planning this conversation carefully. Dad, you look tired, she began with fake concern. Are you remembering to take your medications? I worry about you living alone with your memory issues. I'm doing fine, sweetheart. Just grateful for all your help with the paperwork over the past few months. She smiled that practiced smile, the one she'd perfected for manipulating people who couldn't see through her facade. Of course, Dad, that's what family does for each other. We take care of our own. I ordered my coffee black, no sugar. She ordered something elaborate that required 4 adjectives and special preparation instructions: a caramel macchiato with oat milk, extra hot, light foam, and an additional shot of espresso. Everything about Allison was unnecessarily complicated. We sat by the window overlooking the busy street, watching normal people live their normal lives while federal agents monitored our conversation from unmarked vehicles in the parking lot. A young mother pushing a stroller, a businessman arguing loudly on his phone, college students hunched over laptops, probably studying for exams they thought were the most important things in the world. None of them knew they were witnessing a federal crime being documented for prosecution. You know, I said casually after a few minutes of small talk, I received some confusing mail from Pacific Bank yesterday. Something about a loan I don't remember applying for. Her coffee cup froze halfway to her mouth. The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly with the kind of professional composure that comes from years of practice at deception and manipulation. Dad, you probably just forgot about it, she said with carefully measured concern. You know how your memory has been lately. Maybe you applied for something and it slipped your mind. It was for $89,000. That seems like a lot of money to forget about. Memory loss can be very serious, she replied, but I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes, calculating how much I might know and how much damage control might be necessary. Tell me more about that loan, I said quietly, watching her body language for signs of panic. What loan? The question came out too quickly, too defensively. I don't know anything about any loan. The Pacific Bank loan for $89,000 with my signature on the application. That's when the floodgates opened and 30 years of suppressed contempt came pouring out in a torrent of brutal honesty. Look, Dad, you were never going to use that credit anyway, she said, leaning forward and lowering her voice to what she thought was a confidential whisper. And with your obvious mental condition, someone responsible needs to manage your finances before you lose everything to scammers or bad decisions. My mental condition? The memory loss, the confusion, the inability to handle basic adult responsibilities. Everyone in the family can see what's happening to you. Her voice took on a tone of patient explanation, as if she were talking to a confused child. Dad's too stupid to figure any of this out anyway, she continued, stirring her coffee with aggressive movements. I mean, seriously, who signs legal documents without reading them? Who gives their personal information to strangers? He probably can't even remember what he had for breakfast this morning. And the other loans, First National, Community Savings, those were necessary investments in my family's future, she said with complete confidence. Gregory's business ventures needed capital, and we knew you'd want to help if you understood the situation properly. Every word was being recorded in crystal clear digital quality. Every admission of guilt, every rationalization, every detail of the systematic fraud she'd committed against her own father. You won't remember this conversation tomorrow anyway, she said with breathtaking cruelty. And even if you did, who would believe you? The family failure versus the successful daughter with a perfect credit rating and professional reputation. Please. And then she delivered the confession that would seal her fate. Besides, it's not really stealing when I'm going to inherit everything eventually anyway. I'm just accelerating the timeline and making sure the money gets used properly instead of being wasted on your pathetic lifestyle. Then she said what I needed to hear. 3 days after our coffee shop meeting, Allison made the mistake that would ultimately destroy her completely. She hired Jake Hamilton, a private investigator with a questionable reputation and a willingness to bend ethical rules for the right price. Jake called me that Friday evening with information that changed the entire scope of the investigation. Mr. Crawford, I think you should know what your daughter is planning, he said during our brief phone conversation. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? There are some things we need to discuss face to face. Why? We arranged to meet at Murphy's Diner, 25 miles outside the city in a location that guaranteed privacy and anonymity. The kind of place where long-haul truckers stop for coffee and pie, where conversations disappear into the background noise of clattering dishes and classic rock music from a radio that hadn't been updated since 1985. Jake Hamilton looked exactly like Central Casting's version of a private investigator. Rumpled gray suit that had seen better days, coffee-stained tie, the weary expression of someone who'd spent too many years documenting humanity's worst impulses for money. Your daughter hired me to destroy your reputation systematically and completely, he began without any social pleasantries. She's paying me $5,000 upfront plus bonuses for specific types of evidence that would support a legal competency hearing. What kind of evidence? Jake slid a manila folder across the table. Documentation of substance abuse, financial irresponsibility, erratic behavior, potential danger to yourself or others. Basically, anything that would convince a judge you're no longer capable of managing your own affairs. Inside the folder were surveillance photographs of my apartment building taken from multiple angles, detailed logs of my daily activities over the past 6 weeks, and transcripts of phone calls I'd made to various businesses where I deliberately acted confused and disoriented. She's been having you followed, Jake explained. Professional surveillance, not amateur work. Whoever hired the team before me knew exactly what they were doing. The scope of the operation was staggering. Photos of me taking out trash, checking my mailbox, walking to the corner store for groceries, time-stamped logs showing when I left the apartment and when I returned, even detailed notes about my clothing, apparent mood, and any interactions with neighbors or strangers. This level of surveillance would cost at least $10,000 per month, I observed, studying the professional quality of the documentation. Which raises the question of where she's getting that kind of money, Jake agreed. Your daughter's living well above what her husband's trust fund should support. Either they have access to additional income sources, or they're spending money they expect to have soon. Theodore's inheritance. That would be my guess. She's making a substantial investment in this competency hearing, which suggests she believes the payoff will be worth the cost. Jake pulled out another set of documents. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. She doesn't just want evidence that you're incompetent. She wants me to manufacture evidence if I can't find enough naturally occurring material. Meaning what, specifically? She offered me a $2,000 bonus for photographs of you drinking heavily or appearing intoxicated in public. Another $3,000 for evidence of drug use. $5,000 for documentation that you've been threatening violence or self-harm. And if you can't find evidence that I'm actually doing any of those things? Jake looked uncomfortable for the first time since sitting down. She suggested I might need to be creative about creating opportunities for the right kind of photographs. Maybe leave some empty bottles around your apartment when you're not home. Stage a few scenarios that could be taken out of context. Manufacturing evidence, planting drugs or alcohol, creating false documentation to support perjured testimony in a legal proceeding. Allison wasn't just planning to steal my money, she was orchestrating a comprehensive campaign to destroy my legal rights, my personal freedom, and my basic human dignity. There's more, Jake continued, consulting his notes. She wants complete medical records going back 20 years. Any history of depression, anxiety, heart problems, anything that could be interpreted as mental or physical instability. Why would she need my medical history? Because she's planning to have you committed involuntarily to a psychiatric facility. She needs evidence of either immediate danger to yourself or others, or severe cognitive impairment that makes you unable to care for yourself safely. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 20 degrees as the full scope of Allison's plan became clear. This wasn't just financial fraud or family manipulation. This was a systematic campaign to erase my legal existence as a competent adult human being. Involuntary psychiatric commitment bypasses normal legal protections, Jake explained. Once you're in the system, it can take weeks or months to get out, even with the best lawyers. During that time, she would have emergency power of attorney and complete control over all your financial affairs, including Theodore's inheritance. A quarter of $255 million is approximately $85 million, more than enough to pay for this entire operation and still have enough left over to live like royalty for the rest of her life. I sat quietly for several minutes, absorbing the magnitude of what my daughter was attempting. She wasn't content to simply steal money or manipulate family relationships. She was planning to have me locked away in a psychiatric facility while she liquidated every asset I'd ever accumulated. Mr. Crawford, I need to ask directly. Is there any truth to what she's saying about your mental state? Any history of the problems she's claiming? I smiled for the first time in weeks. Jake, let me ask you something. If you were planning to commit the perfect crime against someone, would you target a victim who was competent and alert, or someone who was confused and helpless? He understood immediately. She's not looking for a father. She's looking for a victim. Exactly. And the more helpless she can make me appear, the easier it becomes to justify what she's doing. So what do you want me to do? Because I have to tell you, what she's asking me to do crosses several legal lines. If I manufacture evidence for a competency hearing, I become an accessory to fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. How much is she paying you for the complete job? $5,000 now, 5 more when the competency hearing is successful, plus bonuses for specific evidence. I'll pay you $25,000 to document everything she's asked you to do, every instruction she's given you, and every piece of evidence she wants you to create or find. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the empty parking lot and the interstate highway beyond. Mr. Crawford, if I do this, she's going to realize very quickly that you're not the confused, helpless old man she thinks you are. Are you prepared for what happens when she finds out? I'd never felt danger like this before in my entire life, but sometimes you have to walk directly into the fire to prove that you won't burn. I have never felt so dangerous. FBI agent Sarah Mitchell coordinated our final operation with the precision of a military campaign. 3 federal agencies, 2 local law enforcement jurisdictions, and a federal prosecutor who specialized in financial elder abuse cases that crossed state lines. We have enough evidence for arrest and conviction right now, Agent Mitchell explained during our final briefing at the federal building downtown. The wire recording alone provides clear documentation of confession to multiple federal crimes. But we want to catch her in the act of the broader conspiracy, I replied. The fake evidence, the planned competency hearing, the systematic campaign to have me declared mentally incompetent. Agreed. The more comprehensive our case, the longer the prison sentence, and the better the deterrent effect for other people who might be planning similar crimes against elderly family members. The FBI had been monitoring Allison's activities for 2 weeks since our coffee shop meeting. Phone surveillance, financial transaction monitoring, and discreet physical surveillance that documented her meetings with lawyers, medical professionals, and other individuals involved in building her competency case. She's been systematic and professional, Agent Mitchell noted, reviewing the surveillance reports. 3 different attorneys consulted about guardianship procedures. 2 physicians contacted about providing expert testimony. A psychiatrist who specializes in age-related cognitive decline. All legitimate professionals? Unfortunately, yes. She's not working with criminals or con artists. She's working with licensed professionals who believe they're helping a concerned daughter deal with an incompetent parent. The FBI had also discovered the full scope of Allison's financial crimes. The $151,000 in fraudulent loans was just the beginning. She'd also opened credit card accounts, applied for business loans using my identity, and even attempted to refinance my apartment lease using forged documents. Total financial damage is approaching $200,000, Agent Mitchell reported. But here's what's really interesting. She's been systematic about staying just under federal threshold amounts for most transactions. Money laundering prevention protocols. Exactly. Someone taught her how to move money around without triggering automatic federal monitoring. This isn't amateur work. The plan for the will reading was elegant in its simplicity. Let the normal legal proceeding unfold naturally while federal agents monitored from discrete positions. When Allison attempted to disrupt the reading or challenge my mental competence, she'd be arrested immediately on the existing charges. The timing is perfect, Agent Mitchell explained. She'll be focused entirely on claiming her inheritance. She won't be thinking about criminal exposure or federal surveillance. Timothy Walsh would be present as a witness to document any attempts at financial manipulation during the will reading itself. Jake Hamilton would provide real-time communication about any last-minute instructions Allison might give him about manufacturing evidence or staging incidents. One concern, Agent Mitchell added, your daughter is intelligent and has been planning this for a long time. When she realizes the trap is closing, she might attempt something desperate, such as emergency psychiatric commitment. If she can convince a judge that you represent an immediate danger to yourself or others, she can have you committed for evaluation before we can complete the arrest process. How would she accomplish that? False emergency call claiming you've threatened suicide or violence. Stage an incident that appears to show erratic behavior. Get a friendly physician to sign commitment papers based on manufactured evidence. I considered that possibility carefully. Locked in a psychiatric ward, while Allison liquidated Theodore's inheritance and disappeared with the money. Unable to communicate with law enforcement, unable to defend myself, watching helplessly while 30 years of careful planning disappeared. We'll have protective surveillance on you until the arrest, Agent Mitchell assured me. Plainclothes officers, unmarked vehicles, immediate response if she attempts any kind of emergency intervention. The next 48 hours would determine everything. The 3 decades of being underestimated and dismissed, 6 months of systematic investigation, and weeks of careful coordination with federal law enforcement, all leading to one moment when Allison would finally face the consequences of her actions. Remember, Agent Mitchell said as our meeting concluded, act completely normal during the will reading. Don't give her any indication that you know what's coming. Let her think she's winning right up until the moment we place her under arrest. I assured her that wouldn't be a problem. After 30 years of pretending to be someone I wasn't, I'd become an expert at controlling my emotions and hiding my true thoughts. The will reading was scheduled for October 12th at 2:30 p.m. Everything is ready for the finale. October 12th arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes everything seem sharper and more focused. Patricia Hendricks's conference room looked exactly the same as it had during our preliminary meeting 6 months earlier. Polished mahogany table reflecting the overhead lights, leather chairs arranged with mathematical precision, floor-to-ceiling law books that represented decades of accumulated legal wisdom. But today, everything was different. Allison arrived precisely on time, wearing her most expensive outfit, a charcoal gray Armani suit that probably cost more than I supposedly earned in 3 months, paired with jewelry worth more than most people's cars. She'd dressed for victory, for vindication, for the moment when she would finally be free of the embarrassing burden of her pathetic father. Gregory Bennett followed exactly 3 steps behind her, as he always did in public. His navy blue suit screamed old money and inherited privilege, the kind of understated elegance that announced his superiority without saying a word. Today he carried a leather portfolio that undoubtedly contained plans for spending their newfound wealth. They both radiated confidence and barely contained excitement. This was their moment, the day when 30 years of frustration and embarrassment would finally be transformed into the financial freedom they'd always believed they deserved. Dad, Allison acknowledged me with a single word, no warmth or emotion beyond basic recognition that her biological father had somehow managed to fulfill the legal requirement of attending. I nodded politely in return, playing my assigned role as the defeated old man who was grateful to be included in important family business, despite his obvious inadequacies. Patricia Hendricks took her position at the head of the table with the formal dignity that major legal proceedings require. Theodore's will was bound in expensive leather, sealed with red wax, and accompanied by several supporting documents that would govern the distribution of his vast fortune. We are gathered today for the final reading and execution of the last will and testament of Theodore Crawford, who passed away on March 15th of this year, Patricia began in her most formal courtroom voice. Allison's eyes were already bright with anticipation. She'd been calculating her share for months, probably planning elaborate vacations and luxury purchases, imagining the social status that would come with inheriting tens of millions of dollars. To my beloved family, I leave the following assets, Patricia continued, reading directly from Theodore's careful handwriting. Crawford Industries, valued at $185 million after recent expansion into renewable energy infrastructure. Gregory was taking notes in his leather portfolio, probably recording numbers for immediate transfer to financial advisors and investment managers. My real estate holdings, valued at $45 million, including commercial properties in Boston, residential developments in Florida, and ranch property in Montana. Allison was practically vibrating with excitement now, her professional composure cracking as the magnitude of the inheritance became real. In my investment portfolio, valued at $25 million in diversified holdings for a total estate value of $255 million. The number hit the room like a physical force. $255 million. More wealth than any of us had ever imagined. Enough to transform lives completely. Enough to buy anything, go anywhere, become anyone. That's when Allison lost all pretense of civilized behavior. "You get nothing, Dad," she screamed, leaping to her feet so violently that her chair toppled backward and crashed into the wall. "You're a pathetic failure who never contributed anything meaningful to this family. Uncle Theodore finally saw the truth about what you really are." Gregory started laughing openly, no longer bothering to maintain even basic politeness. "Maybe now you can afford to move out of that disgusting apartment, Jim. Find somewhere more appropriate for someone of your actual social status." The venom in their voices was shocking even to me, and I'd been preparing for this moment for months. These were people who'd smiled at me across dinner tables, who'd posed for family photographs, who'd called me Dad and Jim with apparent affection for 30 years. Now their true feelings poured out like poison from a broken bottle. 30 years of accumulated contempt and barely suppressed hatred finally given voice. "You ruined our mother's life with your pathetic incompetence," Allison continued, her voice rising to a shriek that could probably be heard in the hallway outside. You've been a cancer on this family for decades, and everyone will be better off when you're finally gone. I sat quietly in my chair, watching this woman I'd raised from infancy tear me apart with surgical precision. Part of me wanted to end it immediately, to reveal everything and watch their faces collapse. But patience had served me well for 30 years. Patricia waited for the emotional storm to subside, then continued reading with professional calm that suggested she'd witnessed similar family explosions before. However, before any distributions can be made, I must note that certain irregularities have been discovered in recent family financial transactions that require immediate attention. The celebration stopped instantly. The laughter died. The room went completely silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic outside. Irregularities? Allison's voice was suddenly small and uncertain. James Crawford, would you like to explain to your daughter about the ongoing federal investigation? Agent Sarah Mitchell stepped through the conference room door, right on schedule, badge clearly visible, handcuffs ready. Allison Crawford Bennett, you are under arrest for bank fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and financial elder abuse. The handcuffs clicked shut at exactly 3:47 p.m., but the biggest surprise was yet to come. I stood up slowly, taking my time, savoring the moment I'd been planning for 3 decades. My movements were deliberate, confident, nothing like the defeated old man everyone expected me to be. Reaching into my jacket pocket, I pulled out my most prized possession, a Hermes tie that had cost $400 30 years ago and had been carefully preserved in my closet, waiting for exactly this moment. I straightened it with the kind of casual elegance that comes from years of practice. Allison, there's something important you should know about your failure of a father. Patricia handed me a thick folder that had been prepared specifically for this revelation. Corporate documents, financial statements, and legal papers that would fundamentally change everyone's understanding of the last 30 years. You're not the only one in this family who's talented at acting. The first document was elegantly simple. Certificate of Incorporation for Meridian Capital Group, filed with the state of Delaware on January 15, 1994. Sole owner, founder, and chief executive officer, James Crawford. I've been pretending to be poor for exactly 30 years. The financial statements told an extraordinary story. Meridian Capital Group had started with $50,000 in savings from my teaching salary and had grown through careful investment, strategic acquisitions, and financial management into one of the most successful private investment firms on the East Coast. Current assets under management, $890 million. My personal net worth accumulated over 3 decades of disciplined investing and business development, $890 million. The best way to catch a thief, I explained to the stunned room, is to make yourself look like you have nothing worth stealing. Theodore had known everything from the beginning. We'd planned this test together, the ultimate evaluation of character disguised as a family inheritance. His $255 million estate was substantial, but it represented less than 30% of my actual wealth. Uncle Theodore and I spent years planning this moment, I continued, spreading the financial documents across the mahogany table. He wanted to see who would love me when they thought I had nothing to offer except basic human dignity. The apartment on Oak Street had been purchased outright in 1994, though I'd maintained the fiction of paying monthly rent. The modest lifestyle, the secondhand clothes, the careful management of every dollar, all of it had been an elaborate performance designed to create the perfect environment for discovering people's true character. Meridian Capital Group has been operating successfully for 30 years, Patricia explained to the room, though Allison was still in handcuffs and seemed unable to process what she was hearing. Mr. Crawford has been managing investments for major corporations, pension funds, and private clients throughout the Northeast. Allison was shaking now, finally understanding the full scope of what she'd attempted to steal and what she'd lost forever. She hadn't just tried to defraud a confused old man. She'd attempted to rob one of the most successful investors in the region. But Dad, the apartment, the clothes, the job at the school... Method acting, sweetheart. I needed to know who would treat me with respect and kindness when they believed I had nothing material to offer them. The woman who'd spent 30 years calling me a pathetic failure was now sobbing in federal handcuffs, while her billionaire father watched with calm detachment. Gregory had gone completely pale and appeared to be having difficulty breathing. The trust fund baby who'd mocked my supposed poverty was now staring at financial statements that dwarfed his family's inherited wealth. The most interesting discovery, I concluded, is that not a single person in this room ever bothered to ask if I was happy with my life, or if there might be more to my story than what appeared on the surface. My daughter is not the only one who's good at acting. 6 months after that October afternoon, the Crawford Foundation for Educational Excellence held its grand opening in a renovated mansion overlooking the Hudson River. The foundation's mission, carved in marble in the entrance lobby, reads, "Excellence recognizes no boundaries of circumstance, only the courage to pursue knowledge and truth." $50 million in initial funding, with plans to expand to $100 million over the next 5 years. Scholarships for students whose parents work multiple jobs to pay rent. Grants for teachers who spend their own money on classroom supplies. Educational programs for adults who never had the chance to finish their schooling. The kind of opportunities I'd wished for when I was young and poor and convinced that money was the only thing standing between me and success. Allison is currently serving an 18-month sentence in federal minimum security prison. She'll be eligible for parole in 12 months if she demonstrates genuine remorse and successfully completes the mandatory financial ethics rehabilitation program. I've established one non-negotiable condition for any future relationship: 6 months of intensive therapy with a licensed psychologist who specializes in family dysfunction, narcissistic personality disorders, and the psychology of financial abuse. The money she stole will never be returned to her. Theodore's $255 million estate has been donated entirely to charitable causes, with the largest portion funding educational initiatives for disadvantaged children. Gregory filed for divorce 2 weeks before Allison's trial began. Apparently, his love had very specific financial requirements that didn't survive criminal prosecution and social disgrace. He's currently living with his parents and working as an insurance adjuster, discovering what it means to earn money through actual work. The apartment on Oak Street has been converted into a resource center for elderly people who are being financially abused by their own family members. Free legal consultation, financial planning assistance, and counseling services for people who've discovered that their children or relatives have been stealing from them. My real home now is a penthouse overlooking Central Park, with floor-to-ceiling windows that provide a view of the city where I built my fortune while pretending to be a failure. Every morning I'm reminded that patience, carefully applied, can yield extraordinary returns. Theodore would have been proud of this ending. He always believed that true character reveals itself under pressure, and that the greatest satisfaction comes not from wealth itself, but from using wealth to create opportunities for people who deserve them. Sometimes you have to lose everything you think matters to discover what actually has value. Family isn't always defined by blood. Love isn't always unconditional. And the quietest person in the room might just be the most dangerous. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear that justice is possible, even when it takes 30 years to arrive. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself.